Hi, I'm Rowan Hale. They said family was supposed to protect you. But mine? They gave me to the wolves and blamed me when I came back bleeding. At my brother's engagement party, his fiancée leaned in and whispered something so vile, I almost laughed. 70 million or she'd destroy me. My brother didn't ask. He swung. My father joined in. And I reached into my pocket and handed them the truth. She screamed. The wedding? Canceled. The empire? Cracked. But if you think that was the end of the story, you're not ready for how far they went to bury the son they never planned to keep. The parking lot shimmered under the faint drizzle, the kind of Seattle rain that never really stops, just hangs in the air like a thought you can't shake off. My old sedan coughed once before dying out, parked between a silver Tesla and a black Mercedes that probably cost more than my yearly income. I sat there for a few seconds, letting the wipers drag across the windshield, breathing through the sound. Inside the restaurant, warm light spilled across glass walls, laughter echoing from behind them. My family's laughter. It had that same pitch it always did. A little too loud, a little too proud. I grabbed my coat, stepped out, and walked toward the door, shoes crunching on wet pavement. The valet gave me the kind of polite smile people reserve for delivery guys who tip well but don't quite belong. I handed him my keys anyway. "Welcome, Mr. Hale," the hostess said as I entered. "The Hale party is already seated." Of course they were. Inside, the place smelled of roasted duck and money. Gold fixtures, velvet curtains, waiters moving like clockwork. My father had picked the place. He liked things that told other people who we were. At the center table, I saw them. My brother Damon in a navy suit that fit him like confidence itself, our father with that familiar posture of control. And beside Damon sat Lyra, the fiancée, a woman who smiled like she'd been practicing her whole life. I waved slightly. No one waved back. "Rowan," my mother's voice would have said, but she wasn't here anymore, just the echo of how it used to sound. Instead, my father's nod was brief, managerial. "You made it." "I did." He motioned to the waiter. "Another glass for my son." That word, son, always sounded different when he used it for me, like it came with an asterisk. I slid into my seat. The table shimmered with silver cutlery, white linens, and a glossy company pamphlet folded neatly beside every plate. I reached for mine, half curious, half cautious. The front page showed the Hale Group's new board announcement. I scanned the names: my father, Damon, 3 executives I didn't recognize. My name wasn't there. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a printing error. Maybe they'd forgotten the junior director credit. But then I saw it. Finance Division, Damon Hale. My throat tightened. Damon didn't even like numbers. He liked people looking at him while someone else did the work. I folded the pamphlet and set it down. No one noticed. Dinner began. Expensive food, polite toasts, forced laughter. I played my role. Smile, nod, say something mildly self-deprecating when spoken to. The good son who didn't make scenes. Halfway through, Lyra raised her glass. "I want to thank Rowan," she said, her tone playful, "for that incredible sports car gift. Damon said it was your idea." The table erupted with laughter. My father chuckled. Damon grinned, arm around her chair. I smiled too, because that's what you do when you're the family's punchline. "That's very generous of you," my father said. "Didn't know your little sedan was hiding a Lamborghini somewhere." Lyra laughed again, tossing her hair. Her perfume filled the air, citrus and sharp. I looked at her. Not the way a man looks at another man's fiancée. but like someone studying a chess opponent who just made an early move. I picked up my wine, sipped slowly. "Guess I'll need to check my bank account in the morning," I said. They laughed harder. Damon's hand tightened on her shoulder. The noise blurred for a while. Forks against porcelain, the clink of glasses. I stared at my plate, barely touching the food. The air conditioning hummed overhead, and I could almost hear my mother's voice again. "Don't let them see you bleed, sweetheart." When dessert arrived, I excused myself and stepped outside for air. The drizzle had turned heavier, coating the streetlights in a halo. I pulled the white handkerchief from my pocket, the one with her initial stitched into the corner, an old R in fading silver thread. I pressed it against my palms, the way I used to when I was nervous as a kid. Inside, through the glass, I saw my father raise his glass to Damon. "To the future of the Hale legacy," he said. That phrase, the one he'd used at my high school graduation, but for Damon. Again at the company's 10th anniversary. For Damon. Lyra's gaze caught mine. She held it longer than necessary, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. Something closer to a warning, or maybe an invitation. Damon followed her glance, eyes narrowing, jaw flexing. And just like that, the air changed. I went back to the table, sat down. No one spoke for a moment. Then Lyra leaned in toward Damon, whispering something that made his brow furrow. I felt it. The shift. The invisible current that runs through every family pretending to be fine. We finished dinner with fake laughter and tighter smiles. As we stood to leave, my father patted Damon's back. "You're doing me proud, son." Then he looked at me, his hand halfway up before he decided against it. "Drive safe." "I will." Outside, the valet brought my car around. The rain had softened to mist. I got in, shut the door, and sat there for a long moment watching their silhouettes through the restaurant glass. My family, perfectly framed in warmth and light. For some reason, that night felt different, like a string had finally snapped, too thin to see, too quiet to notice, but gone all the same. She smiled at me like she already knew how the night would end. I didn't return the smile. Instead, I drifted to the edge of the chandelier-lit room, where a chilled bucket of champagne bottles stood beside flutes, lined like soldiers. The air inside had warmed, saturated with perfume, cologne, and the subtle bitterness of envy. I stood slightly apart, one hand gripping my phone, the other in my pocket. I wasn't really checking messages, just pretending to. That's what you do when you've got nothing left to say and too much on your mind to fake another laugh. Around me, the party swirled like a well-rehearsed ballet. Damon and Lyra glided from group to group, shaking hands, posing for photos, fielding compliments like they'd trained for it. Maybe they had. Maybe this whole thing was always a performance. The toast was coming up. I could feel it in the way people started gathering near the floral arch, how the photographer raised his camera slightly higher. Just behind the toast table, Damon whispered something into Lyra's ear. She laughed, short, sharp, perfectly timed. Then, slowly, like it was nothing, she broke away and started walking toward me. I didn't move. She stepped close, her heels quiet against the marble floor. I caught a whiff of that citrus and lavender perfume she always wore, the kind that stays on your clothes long after the person's gone. Her lips curled just enough to pass for a smile, her eyes never quite meeting mine. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she murmured, lifting a champagne glass from the table. "Or maybe just your future." I opened my mouth to reply, but then she leaned in, breath brushing my ear. "Buy me a supercar and transfer 70 million, she whispered, soft and sharp like a scalpel, "or I'll tell everyone I'm pregnant with your child." The world didn't stop spinning, but my breath did. I pulled back slightly, blinking, not sure I'd heard her right. She was already sipping her drink like nothing had happened, still watching the room, not me. "What did you just say?" I whispered back, my voice lower than I expected. She glanced sideways, her smile intact. "You heard me. 70 million. Are you insane?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her expression said it all. This wasn't her first time playing this game. I took a step back, trying to understand what was happening. And that's when Damon turned. He must have seen us standing too close, must have caught the tail end of my stunned expression. Whatever story had already been brewing in his head, it didn't need words. He stormed toward me, eyes blazing. "You think I wouldn't notice?" he shouted. "You slimy piece of—" Before I could get a word in, his fist crashed into my jaw. The pain exploded instantly, radiating up my cheekbone. My head snapped sideways as my body staggered into the champagne table. Glasses shattered. A bottle spun off and hit the floor with a sharp, wet pop. Gasps tore through the crowd. Phones were already up, recording, photographing, documenting my shame in real time. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I growled, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. My lip was split. Warm blood pooled against my teeth. "Enough!" my father bellowed, stepping forward. "You've shamed us, both of you." Both? He didn't even ask what happened. I looked around, waiting, hoping for someone to speak up, to say, "Hey, maybe we should ask what's going on here." But no one did. Lyra was already playing her part. "He was harassing me, Damon," she said, her voice trembling just enough. "You saw it. He cornered me." I stared at her. The same woman who'd whispered poison into my ear seconds ago now looked like a trembling victim, clutching Damon's arm for support. Her mascara didn't even smudge. "You lying?" I caught myself. There was no point. They were already looking at me like I was the problem. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the white handkerchief. My fingers were shaking slightly as I pressed it to my lip. The embroidered R, stitched by my mother before cancer took her, blurred under the spreading blood. A camera flash caught the red on white, an image that would haunt me later. "I didn't touch her," I said, voice flat. No one responded. The room was silent except for the soft hum of air vents and one baby crying in the back. I stared at my father. His jaw was tight, hands clenched behind his back like a general at war. "You're a disgrace, Rowan," he said quietly, not even looking at me. That was it. I turned without a word and walked out. Past the waiters who wouldn't meet my eyes. Past the guests pretending to look at their phones. Past the broken glass and judgments hanging in the air. Outside, the rain had turned cold again. Not pouring, but enough to soak through my collar. I stood under the awning, breathing slowly. My hands were still shaking, but my chest wasn't tight anymore. Not from sadness, not even from shame. It was something else now. Clarity. For the first time, I didn't feel like explaining myself, didn't feel like chasing their approval. I wiped my lip again and slipped the stained handkerchief back into my coat pocket. I stood there for a while, letting the cold settle into my bones, because I knew something had broken back there. And it wasn't just my lip. It was trust. And once trust shatters, you don't glue it back. You sweep the pieces and walk away. I thought the night was over, but the real blow came the next morning. The light in my apartment was gray and unforgiving, filtered through the mist that hung over Elliott Bay like a wet sheet. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating over and over on the nightstand. It wasn't the alarm. It was relentless. Buzz, pause, buzz again. I rolled over, rubbed my swollen jaw, and grabbed the phone. The lock screen was a sea of notifications. News alert. Scandal at the Hale engagement gala. Breaking. CFO Rowan Hale accused of assaulting brother's fiancée. Video footage inside. Viewer discretion advised. I stared, still not fully awake. Then I saw the thumbnail. My face, blood on my mouth, eyes dazed, caught in a freeze frame like a mugshot with better lighting. I unlocked the phone. Twitter, Reddit, news blogs, corporate gossip sites, all of them. I didn't even know half these outlets existed, and yet they were dissecting me like a headline character from a TV series. I wasn't Rowan Hale, son of the founder, anymore. I was the disturbed brother, the scandal behind the suit, the Hale family's shame. My thumb hovered over a text notification from my father. For a second, I let myself imagine it would say something like, "Call me. We need to talk." I tapped it open. "Do not contact us. You've caused enough damage." That was it. No questions, no doubt, no request for my side of the story. I sat up, my back against the cold leather headboard. The room felt different today. Emptier, like even the walls were ashamed of me. I got up slowly, walked to the kitchen. The coffee machine blinked its usual 8 a.m. greeting. I poured water, added grounds, and let it hum to life. The scent filled the space, warm and bitter, fitting. Laptop open on the kitchen island, I skimmed the news feeds again. There it was, right in the press section of the Hale Corporation's website. Rowan Hale, once a contributing member of the Hale Corporation, has recently shown signs of emotional instability and has been removed from all decision-making roles. We hope he seeks help and respects the privacy of our family moving forward. Signed by my father and Damon. I blinked hard, reading the statement again, as if maybe I'd missed a word that would change its meaning. Emotional instability. Removed. Privacy. They weren't just cutting me off, they were erasing me. I scrolled down. A photo from last night's event was embedded beneath the release. My mother's chair, an antique, upholstered in soft green velvet, placed at the end of the table. A white rose rested on its seat, captioned, "Reserved for Family Unity." I knew that chair. She sat in it at every holiday, every anniversary dinner, every moment that mattered. It wasn't a tribute. It was a placeholder for a version of the family that died when she did. I closed the laptop. For a long time, I just sat there, letting the hum of the city filter in through the window. The ferry horn in the distance. A siren winding down 2 blocks away. I caught my reflection in the glass. A man with a busted lip, puffy eye, and a silence so loud it felt like screaming. My thoughts drifted to her hands stitching my initial into that handkerchief on a fall afternoon years ago. To her voice. When people lie about you, don't rush to fix it. Truth always finds its voice, but only if you're quiet enough to let it rise. I used to think she said that for comfort. Today, I understood it was strategy. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something, instinct maybe, pushed my thumb to the screen. "Hello?" A woman's voice, calm and urgent at once. "You don't know me, but I know what she did. Lyra. Check your mother's files. She kept everything." What? Wait, who is this? But the line had already gone dead. I stared at the screen. No callback option, no voicemail. I stood quickly, walked to the bookshelf against the back wall. Behind it was a drawer I hadn't touched in over 2 years. It was my mother's, locked since the week after her funeral. I hadn't been ready. Now I was. I took the key from a wooden box she used to keep safety pins and cough drops in. The drawer clicked open, the scent of lavender and old paper rising like a memory. Inside were envelopes, photographs, and a small black USB drive wrapped in tissue. A note taped to it. For Rowan, if they ever try again. My breath caught in my throat. She knew. She'd seen it coming long before I had. My fingers shook slightly as I slid the USB drive into the port. The click sounded louder than it should have in the silence of my apartment. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. It beat against the windows with a steady rhythm, like time ticking down to something inevitable. On the screen, a folder opened. Archive Mother. I didn't rush. I let the moment stretch, as if hesitating might somehow preserve my last memory of her as someone who baked cinnamon rolls on Sundays and tucked handwritten notes into my college textbooks. But the contents of this drive, whatever they weren't about nostalgia. They were strategy, protection, a mother's last shield. Inside the folder were digital scans of receipts, board meeting notes, financial transfers. Nothing illegal at first glance, but everything meticulous. Then I saw it. A video file labeled Hale Trust. I clicked play. The screen flickered and the grainy footage loaded. I recognized the room immediately. The boardroom at Hale Corp. The long table. The mural of Mount Rainier behind the leather chairs. Lyra sat across from my father. Younger, no more than 25. Her hair was a darker shade, and her expression less polished but no less calculating. My father leaned forward, voice low but clear. Keep Damon focused, loyal. Make sure his distractions stay off the radar. If you can manage that, I'll make sure you're taken care of. You understand what that means. Lyra nodded once, slowly. I understand. And then, her smile. The same one she'd flashed at me during the toast, like she was sealing something with her eyes. The video ended. I just sat there, staring at the blank screen. The silence in the room changed. It wasn't just quiet. It was loaded, sharp, like the space between a fuse being lit and the explosion that follows. That engagement wasn't about love. It was a deal. A corporate arrangement. A tool for control. And me? I was never part of the plan, except maybe as leverage. I clicked through the other files, heart pounding. One document caught my eye. A trust fund ledger. My name appeared multiple times. Assets under my signature I never approved. Transfers redirected to Damon's accounts. Dates backdated. Paper trails too clean to be sloppy. They didn't just cut me out. They used me as cover. My jaw tightened, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. My mind raced with possibilities. Go to the press, file charges, drag them all into the public light. But then I heard her voice again, not from a recording, but from memory. When people lie about you, don't rush to fix it. Truth always finds its voice. I closed the laptop gently, breathing through my nose. The fury was still there, but it was harnessed now, controlled. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. And I wanted them to feel it the way I had. Slow, cutting, undeniable. The next morning, I shaved, dressed, and took the USB drive with me. My face was still, bruised, but I wore a tie. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because it made me feel steady, prepared. I walked into the lobby of Hale Corporation like I'd done for years, only this time the security guard didn't look up. I tapped my badge. Nothing. Badge isn't working, I said, keeping my tone light. The guard glanced up, then quickly looked away. "Mr. Hale, your access was revoked. I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside." I almost laughed. "You're asking the guy who wrote the security clearance system to step outside?" He didn't respond. I turned slowly and caught a glimpse through the glass elevators. Damon and Lyra. She was laughing at something. He leaned in, smug. Not a scratch on him, as if none of it had happened. I stepped back into the rain. I didn't even bother with the umbrella this time. On my way to the parking lot, I heard someone call my name quietly. "Rowan." I turned. Helen, my mother's old assistant, retired last year, hair grayer, but her eyes still sharp as ever. "I don't have much time," she said, glancing behind her. "But your mom, she was building a case before she died. She didn't trust your father, or Damon, or Lyra." She handed me a file folder wrapped in plastic. "She kept this separate. Said to give it to you only if things ever got dangerous." "What's in it?" I asked. "I didn't look, but I know one thing. She believed you were the only Hale worth trusting." I nodded, throat thick. As she walked away, I slipped the file under my coat, hands still wrapped tight around my mother's handkerchief in my pocket, its fabric now stiff from dried blood, but still whole. For the first time, I wasn't running. I wasn't begging. I wasn't invisible. I was ready. 3 days later, the road to the Hale estate curved like a serpent, slick with rain and lined with leafless oaks. The windshield wipers swiped in steady rhythm as I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I hadn't been back since Mom's funeral, but this time I wasn't returning as a son. I was returning as a man with truth in his pocket. The wrought iron gates stood at the end of the drive like they had for decades. I pulled up and waited. The rain beat harder on the roof, and for a moment I thought no one would open. Then, after an uncomfortably long pause, they creaked apart, slow and reluctant, like even the estate itself was unsure if I belonged. Driving through those gates used to mean coming home. Now it felt more like crossing into enemy territory. The house stood solemn against the gray sky. Wide windows, dark stone, trim hedges, everything in its place, except the soul that once lived there. I stepped out, pulling my coat tighter against the cold, and headed toward the front door. Inside, silence ruled. No footsteps, no greetings, just the low hum of the central heating and the echo of my own presence. The hallway was exactly as I remembered. Marble floors, oil paintings, the faint scent of cedar polish. Except one thing had changed. The portrait wall. Our family photos lined it, spanning years, birthdays, corporate galas, holidays. But Mom's picture was gone. I stopped mid-step. There was still a faint rectangular outline where it had hung, slightly cleaner than the rest of the wall, like her absence was scrubbed in on purpose. I knew then, this wasn't just about business. This was about erasing everything she touched, including me. I kept walking. In the study, a fire crackled. My father sat in his favorite chair near the hearth, brandy in hand, looking every bit the patriarch of his own mythology. Damon lounged on the couch, legs crossed, casual arrogance oozing from every gesture. Lyra stood near the window, perfectly poised, arms folded like she'd been rehearsing this scene. None of them stood when I entered. "Well," my father began, not bothering to hide the contempt in his tone, "the prodigal son returns. What is it this time? Another accusation?" Damon didn't speak. He just smirked, eyes flicking briefly to the folder under my arm. Lyra tilted her head. "You really should stop this, Rowan. You're embarrassing yourself. It's starting to look desperate." I didn't answer right away. I looked at each of them. Their expressions told me everything I needed to know. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I was weak. And for a long time, I had been. But not today. I remember, I said quietly, staying up until 3 a.m., balancing the company books while Damon was out blowing through cash on rooftop parties. I remember Dad telling me it was just helping, part of the family legacy. I believed that. I wanted to. My father cut in sharply. You're sick. You've always been jealous of your brother. This obsession. I walked forward and set the folder on the desk in front of him. That, I said evenly, contains records of wire transfers, signatures I never made, and a pattern of financial fraud that goes back 7 years. No one moved. If I were you, I continued, still calm, I'd start telling the truth before this goes beyond the family. For a moment, no one spoke. Damon's smirk faded. Lyra's jaw tightened, though she tried to mask it with a bored blink. You've always been dramatic, my father said, but his voice had lost some of its usual bite. This little tantrum won't change anything. He nodded toward the butler, who had appeared silently at the door. See Mr. Hale out. I didn't argue. I turned slowly and walked past the portraits again. The hollow space where Mom's face used to smile down now felt like a warning. They'd tried to erase her, but she was still here, in every piece of evidence, in every truth they buried. Outside, the storm had worsened. Sheets of rain pelted the pavement as I reached the car. I slid inside, drenched, chest tight. I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I sat in the stillness, watching water race down the windshield like veins. I pulled the stained handkerchief from my coat pocket, its threads worn but unbroken. I gave them one chance, I whispered, voice steady despite the roar of the storm. They won't get another. The rain hadn't stopped when I got home that night. I left my coat on the chair and the handkerchief on the kitchen counter, stained and folded, like a flag from a battle I hadn't chosen. I thought I'd get one night of silence, maybe even a few hours of peace before the next round came swinging. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I opened my mailbox to find a thick envelope with my father's firm's letterhead. Inside, a cease and desist. Pages of legal jargon accusing me of defamation, financial misconduct, and willful slander against Hale Corporation and its founding partners. They accused me of embezzling millions. My accounts? Frozen. Just like that. The next morning, I couldn't pay for coffee. My card got declined, and the barista, who used to know my name, suddenly avoided eye contact. She didn't ask if I wanted my usual. Just said, "Sorry, sir," and called the next person in line. I walked out without saying a word. That afternoon, the headlines broke. Some online tabloid ran with, "Rowan Hale under federal investigation. Shocking turn at the Hale engagement gala." My name was everywhere, dragged across every screen like a cautionary tale. They even had screenshots, faked ones, of emails between me and Lyra, doctored threads implying I'd harassed her, blackmailed my own family, and people believed it. My phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts. Not even from the few colleagues I thought still respected me. Every bridge I thought I'd built had quietly burned behind me while I was too distracted to see the smoke. That night, I drove aimlessly. I passed the old Hale mansion, just a silhouette in the hills, grand and untouchable. Every window lit like it was still hosting parties. Except one, Mom's old room, pitch black. I pulled over and just sat there, engine humming, headlights dim against the rain-slicked driveway. That dark window, her window, felt like the only honest thing left in that house. The only part not putting on a show. The next day, my landlord knocked. "I don't like this," he said, voice low, "but your lease is voided. Building's under new ownership." I didn't need to ask. Damon had bought the place. "I'm giving you a week," he added. "Off the books. Just get clear." So that's how it works in my family. If you don't fall in line, they don't just cut you off. They erase you. That night, I didn't go inside. I stayed in my car, parked outside the place that was still technically mine, though every square foot now felt like borrowed time. I watched the rain run sideways across the windshield and listened to nothing. Silence used to feel heavy. Tonight, it felt oddly familiar. I reached into the glove box and pulled out the handkerchief, still folded, still stained. I laid it across my palm, thumb brushing the edges where my mother's stitches remained, delicate, steady, intentional. "If I let them silence me, they win," I said aloud. My voice sounded tired, like it had aged years and weeks. "But if I fight now, I'll have to become someone they no longer recognize." I looked in the rearview mirror. The reflection staring back was not the version of me who smiled at shareholders or signed quarterly reports. This man was something else, something stripped down, and maybe that was what I needed to become. I leaned forward and wiped the fog from the inside of the windshield with the handkerchief. The streetlight outside flickered across the dash. My hand lingered on the steering wheel. "Mom," I murmured, "I'm done keeping the peace." That was the last night I let myself feel sorry. They thought I was broken. I was just getting quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean surrender. The kind that listens. Late that night, with my apartment half-packed and the eviction deadline ticking down, I took one last drive downtown. Not to Hale Tower itself, that glass monument to ego, but to a strip of industrial buildings near the shipyards, old corrugated walls, faded paint. The kind of place no one looked twice at. I'd rented a storage unit under a name from my mother's files, Emmeline Cordell. She used it before she married my father, back when she was still herself. The unit was small, cold, one flickering bulb overhead, but I didn't need warmth. I needed cover, silence, distance. I set up a folding table, an old laptop, a paper tray, no Wi-Fi. I brought in a generator and backup batteries. Every document I'd copied from the USB drive sat in manila folders, organized and labeled. And right above the desk, I pinned her handkerchief, bloodstain outward, just over my line of sight. Not a keepsake anymore. A compass. Rain ticked lightly on the metal roof as I opened the folder labeled Archive Mother. At the bottom was a slip of paper. Thin, yellowed, handwritten in her unmistakable script. "Rowan, if you're reading this, they've started again. Don't argue. Don't plead. Watch. Record. Wait." So I did. I tapped in the old access codes she left behind. Most no longer valid, but one sequence unlocked a backdoor into Hale Corporation's outdated server. The archive system had never been upgraded. I navigated through weeks of blurry surveillance footage, board meetings, shareholder updates, security logs. Then I found it. April 18th, 5 years ago. Boardroom 6A. I clicked play. My father sat at the head of the table, his posture exact, voice calm and clipped. Damon lounged beside him, careless in posture, but sharp in tone. "Rowan's a liability," my father said. "He's competent, but too sentimental. Always wants to protect people who don't matter." Damon scoffed. "He's not built for this world. We either cut him loose or make sure he can't interfere." My fingers hovered above the keyboard. "They didn't destroy me by accident," I whispered. It was policy. The grief I'd carried for weeks burned away, replaced with something colder, steadier. They hadn't just cut me out, they'd planned it, crafted it. The next file nearly stopped my heart. It was labeled Trust Amendment Revised. Inside, legal documentation confirming my mother had owned 40% of the company's original shares. Upon her death, those shares were transferred, not to my father, not held in family trust, but to me, legally, quietly. I was the majority shareholder. The company's direction, its votes, its future, it was mine, and they'd known, which explained why they worked so hard to erase me. I stared at the page, the seal in the corner, the digital signature. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I printed a copy, sealed it in a plain white envelope, and sent it, no return address, to the family's legal counsel. Let them find it. Let the panic set in. I didn't need to scream. I just needed them to flinch. By the time I left the unit, it was past midnight. Seattle's streets were quiet, slick with rain. My breath fogged the windshield as I sat behind the wheel, unmoving. I reached up and gently took the handkerchief from the wall, folded it once, then again. This time, I let the clean side show, let the world see what it wanted to. Let them think I've forgiven them, I muttered. It's easier that way. I pulled out of the lot, slow, steady, not looking back. This wasn't revenge, not yet. This was reconnaissance, a listening game. I'd spent my life trying to speak the truth. Now I was done talking. The storm hadn't passed. It was gathering. I was halfway through organizing my files in the storage unit, names, signatures, footage, contracts, when my phone lit up. An unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. The voice on the other end was brittle, hollow in a way I hadn't heard since my mother's funeral. "We need to talk," my father said. "Bring what you have." There was no anger this time, no command, just the quiet panic of a man who'd finally run out of levers to pull. I didn't respond. I hung up, gathered the drive, folded the handkerchief one last time, and slipped both into my coat pocket. By the time I crossed the bridge onto Mercer Island, the roads were slick with mist. The mansion stood at the end of the drive like a memory too heavy to carry. It hadn't changed. Not the brick archway, not the carefully trimmed hedges, but it felt smaller now, like the illusion was collapsing under its own weight. The butler let me in without a word. Inside, the lighting was low. Firelight flickered in the front sitting room, throwing long shadows over familiar faces. My father sat in the leather chair closest to the fireplace. Damon stood near the window, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Lyra was on the couch, legs crossed too precisely, hands folded too tightly. No one greeted me. "Rowan," my father began. "Before this goes any further," Damon interrupted. "You're tearing this family apart." I said nothing. He took a step forward. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think dragging our name through the mud makes you righteous?" Still, I stayed silent. "Answer me," he barked. I reached into my coat and placed a small drive on the glass coffee table. "You already did," I said calmly. With the remote on the end table, I connected the drive to the screen overhead and pressed play. Static. Then image. A boardroom, older, grainier footage. A younger Lyra sat across from my father. Her voice, clear as crystal, echoed through the room. "I'll keep him under control as long as the money keeps coming." The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra froze. Damon turned toward her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You?" His voice cracked. "It's not what it sounds like," she whispered, eyes darting toward my father. That was years ago. It wasn't. You lied, Damon hissed. All this time. Was any of it real? Lyra stood abruptly. Don't turn this on me. You knew what this family was when I walked in. My father sank back into the chair, staring at the fire like it might swallow him whole. I stepped forward and placed my mother's blood-stained handkerchief next to the drive. 2 things, one clean, one tainted. Truth and the cost it carried. You recorded us, Lyra shouted, voice high, almost breaking. I shook my head slowly. No, she did. Years ago. Mom. That hit harder than anything else I'd said. Damon took a step back. Lyra's mouth dropped open. My father looked like the wind had been knocked from his chest. Lyra reached for the drive. I didn't stop her. She hurled it against the floor. Plastic shattered across the marble. It's backed up, I said simply. Every company server, every lawyer, every board member. Then came the sound I hadn't heard in years. The scream. Raw. Human. Ugly. Lyra fell to her knees, hands gripping her head. You ruined us, she shrieked. No, I said, my voice calm. You ruined yourselves. Damon said nothing. He looked between us, lips parted as if wanting to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My father finally spoke. You'll destroy the family name. I turned to him. You destroyed the family. I'm just turning the lights back on. No yelling, no vengeance, just truth. Behind me, in the adjoining dining room, sat a long table set for no one, every chair pushed in, except one, the one at the far end, empty, reserved once for my mother at every family gathering. She never missed a seat, until she was erased. I walked to the edge of the room and looked at it. The chair was untouched, like the house hadn't dared repurpose it. For the first time in years, I nodded toward it. That was for her. That was for everything she saw coming, but couldn't stop. I didn't stay long. There was nothing left to say. The drive was gone. The truth wasn't. No one followed me to the door. As I stepped into the night, the wind picked up again. Cold. Familiar. But it didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt done. I walked to the car slowly, each step pulling a piece of that house off my back. By the time I turned the key in the ignition, I felt weightless. I didn't look back. But even as I drove away, I knew some things don't stay buried. The past has a way of following close behind. And the world? It hadn't heard the story yet. But by morning, it would. They said the truth had a funny way of surfacing, drip by drip, then all at once. A month later, the noise had quieted. Reporters found new scandals. Stocks shifted. Faces once framed in press releases faded from screens and newspaper columns. But I hadn't returned to the mansion. I hadn't reached out to Damon, or Lyra, or the man I once called father. I didn't need to. This morning, I didn't wake to headlines or lawyer calls. I woke early, just before dawn. The city was still asleep. A light fog clung to the streets like a gentle curtain, and the cold hadn't yet decided if it would settle in for the day. I didn't grab my phone. I didn't check my email. Instead, I folded a handkerchief, the same one I'd carried through every turn of this mess, and placed it carefully in my coat pocket. Then I picked up a small bouquet of white lilies from the kitchen counter. I had bought them the night before, knowing I wouldn't want to stop on the way. By the time I pulled into the gravel drive at Evergreen Memorial Cemetery, the light was starting to spill softly through the clouds. The lake beside it, still glassy, reflected nothing but sky. I walked the path I'd walked countless times, first as a boy holding her hand, then as a man burying her name, and now, finally, as someone she might recognize. The hill wasn't as steep as I remembered. Age, I suppose, makes memory exaggerate. Or maybe peace makes the walk easier. Her headstone stood beneath the same maple tree, weathered but proud. The engraving simple, just her name, no titles, no frills. Beside it sat a chair, not a marble bench or some polished monument. A wooden chair, slightly tilted, its back uneven, its legs weathered from seasons spent outside. I hadn't placed it there. I didn't need to. It had always been there, in one form or another. Every family dinner, every holiday, every gathering, the chair no one sat in, the one meant for her, yet always empty. I knelt beside it and laid the lilies near the base of her grave, brushing away the few leaves that had gathered overnight. Then, slowly, I pulled the handkerchief from my pocket. The blood stain was faint now, more memory than mark. I placed it on the seat of the chair, not like an offering, not like a goodbye, just as it should be. I kept it with me, I murmured. All this time, every room I walked into where I wasn't wanted, it reminded me I didn't walk in alone. The wind moved softly through the branches overhead. I reached into my coat one more time and removed a folded envelope. No logos, no seals. Just one final document, one I hadn't shared with the press or lawyers or anyone. It was the original trust amendment, signed by my mother, witnessed, legal, and it didn't hand the company to me, not entirely. It dissolved the Hale family's private ownership and redirected the majority shares, every last percentage, into a foundation, one she had set up years ago, a fund dedicated to building safe housing for women escaping abuse, women like her, women no one listened to until it was too late. I sat down beside the chair. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It felt full. I looked out across the lake. 2 swans moved across the water in slow, perfect rhythm. No noise, no wake, just presence. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to be heard, trying to be seen, trying to matter. Funny thing is, once you stop needing their validation, you finally understand your own worth. I turned the document over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. Not just the ink and paper, but the legacy it carried. "You planned it all, didn't you?" I whispered. Even down to this. The sun began to peek through the clouds, just enough to warm the stone beneath my palm. I stood up, slowly, and looked down at the chair. It didn't look so empty anymore. It looked complete. I folded the document once more and slid it back into my coat. Then, with both hands, I lifted the chair. Not to keep it, but to leave it behind. Its job was done. As I turned toward the path and began to walk away, a gentle gust caught the corner of the handkerchief, lifting it just slightly before it settled again. Like breath, like release. At the edge of the hill, I looked back once, the lake, the chair, the lilies, still, unmoving, peaceful. "Mom," I said quietly, "I didn't win. I just stopped losing." Then I walked down the path, the morning stretching wide ahead of me. And behind me, the wind moved through the trees like a voice finally at rest,